throughout the vast majority of human history, our societies have each been intricately interwoven with specific places. Our lives, our families, livelihoods, dreams, imaginations, our values were nature. And in this vanishingly recent history, that's begun to unravel. And it's not only threatened the ecological fabric of the planet, but it's literally created an identity crisis where we've forgotten who we are, and there's this global tragedy of the commons, the precipitating climate change and the ecological downgrading of planet Earth. But there are places where these threads remain strong. Indigenous peoples who are less than 5% of the human population, still rooted in their territorial birthplaces, are upholding remarkable places. And when those people thrive, those places thrive. And this is no small thing. Indigenous peoples uphold the healthiest ecosystems on the planet, areas critical for biodiversity, for the stability of climate and security of freshwater and food systems. Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah, it's actually happening. And increasingly, like the way where the I can't go backwards, huh?
Yeah, the bottom one.
Oh yeah. Increasingly, the fate of these people is really the fate of us all. And the reason why these places still persist as they do is because of what we call guardianship. It's the right, the acceptance of responsibility, and the capacity to uphold thriving natural systems within collective territory. And around the world, this guardianship by Indigenous peoples is threatened. And Indigenous peoples are screaming for recognition and solidarity. Nia Tero exists to make this happen. And in places where ecosystems of a scale vital to all people exist within the collective territories of Indigenous people, and where their governance and agency is either now capable or could be capable of sustaining large-scale natural systems within those territories, Nia Tero deploys a simple model. We link Indigenous peoples with large-scale ecosystems within their territory to partnerships around guardianship that are secured over the long haul by durable technical and financial support. These partnerships are explicit and bound by agreements that state mutual obligations around guardianship itself. Indigenous peoples agree to uphold healthy ecosystems. Nia Tero provides the financial and technical support to make that possible. And these are explicit, they're done with humility, and are based on the rights of Indigenous peoples and an idea of equity. And one of the most important things is recognizing the critical importance of financial and social security to what we call guardianship. Nia Tero is in for the long haul. Not 3 to 5 year timescales that have addled progress in the past, but thinking on the scale of human generation times. Over the next 10 years, we want to take that model and implement it to secure a constellation of 30 or more place-anchored partnerships at the scale of human generation times that are connected and amplified for impact at scale. And we're doing this across 2 strategic pathways. So in regions where Indigenous territories and vital ecosystems overlap in huge ways, such as in Amazonia, we're pursuing networks of long-term partnerships. For example, in Amazonia, we're just on the beginning of a set or a network of partnerships within a 50 million hectare mosaic of forest and riverine systems that's home to the largest concentration of people's involuntary isolation on Earth. Where those people's rights are upheld, we know, data shows that those forests vital to climate and all humanity's well-being thrive. In the Pacific Islands, we have the opportunity for Indigenous nation states and their Indigenous peoples within them to uphold guardianship across thriving reef and island-studded ocean whose footprint is larger than 1/10 the surface of the Earth. Over the last year, we've been crowding in partnerships, a network of partnerships under what's been called the Sky Islands Pledge, which has now become law banning all logging and mining in the uplands of the Solomon Islands. Over 21% of the land area of the country, a huge area in the Pacific, over 500,000 hectares. And these are areas that are sacred to local peoples. There's an existing almost deep and enduring conservation ethos already around these sacred places of origin, but they're also critical to fresh water and agricultural security and treasure troves of primary biological diversity. 10 landholding groups have entered into the beginnings or preparatory stages of these explicit partnerships and are actually beginning to inspire other nations to take on similar actions in Samoa, Vanuatu, New Caledonia, and New Guinea. But we also, sort of beyond reason, what we're increasingly seeing, and especially over the last year, is that around the world, there are indigenous collectives who are already showing the way. Peoples who have, over the last, sometimes 30, 40 years, are already upholding what we call guardianship and show sort of diverse forms of what's possible in terms of a thriving future for planet Earth and humanity. And through a fellowship program for indigenous collectives, we want to link a world-facing set of indigenous collectives and partnerships with them into what we're calling the Wayfinder Circle, which can convene, lead, share, and inspire others to follow their pathways to guardianship. An example of that, and among 6 wayfinding groups that we're partnering with, are the Nistapi, the Blackfeet in Montana, who over the past 30 years have expanded, sort of pushed treaty law beyond the boundaries of their reservation and are now upholding increasingly secure guardianship across millions of hectares of the most intact mountain grassland mosaic in the United States. And just last week, through the Northern Tribes Buffalo Treaty that the Nistapi were leading, bison just returned for the first time in 100 years into Blackfeet country, and it's an uptick for 3 million plus hectares of some of the best thriving grassland, most endangered biome on Earth in the Northern Plains in North America. But I was thinking when I did my survey, I was looking at we have about 13 or 14 partnerships in various stages of preparation, negotiation, and actually some in delivery. It's about 35 million hectares of land potentially under more secure guardianship, 200 million hectares of ocean, and it's absolutely not enough. To actually reach the global scale we want to reach, we need others to crowd in and invest in ways that are impossible for Nia Tera alone. And what we want to do is to invest in world-class media platforms, in social media, in vivid storytelling around practical stories of success that are impossible for governments and funders to ignore. And if we can get this right, it actually goes beyond conservation or guardianship. As a global mosaic of societies, we're in our infancies. We're like descendant children thinking about what we've inherited and what we can gain from it. If we're successful, we need increasingly around the world for people to shift away from thinking like descendants to thinking like ancestors, and ask themselves a question that indigenous leaders have been asking and answering for generations. What kind of ancestors will we be? And in the wake of the terrible news earlier this month of doom and gloom from the Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, that is a damnation of our lives in this room. The one glimmer of hope is that there are big, thriving areas still left, and if we equitably partnership with the indigenous people who have upheld them by no accident, there is actually hope as an uptick of that. So thank you very much.